Yes, sorry, I'm not very good at typing very quickly, so I just will speak. You didn't mention anything about detection methods and also things like citizen science, which a massive amount of information comes from the general public about what invasive species are coming in, and I wonder if that was within scope.
Yeah, as I told you, it was a very rapid overview, and this I will take note of your comment and see how we can insert it in the database, in the issue of databases. It is true that there are many citizen sciences and applications on the telephone that can be very helpful and can contribute to this.
I guess I'm also thinking of new techniques such as camera trapping, other methods of machine or computer vision, and eDNA as well, all at their early stages of being used now, but would certainly, if you think in 10 or 20 years' time, you will expect those things to be commonplace.
Yeah. And how to, and another thing that could be complementary to this is how to keep this information, which is a completely other subject, but it's a question of the databases. And okay, I take note of it, and I will bring it to discussion on the next rounds of negotiations. But it is already mentioned, but I'm not sure. It's very detailed on the IPBES documents, but not quite explicit on the annexes of the CBD. So you're right, and thank you for your comment. I take note. And
okay, thank you.
Someone
yes, yeah, there's another question from. I don't. Sorry, I won't tell you name because of the relation. So please go.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalie. Yeah, just to complementing what Groom was mentioning, my name is Jaume Pierre. I'm from the Institute of Marine Science. I think it's particularly important to think about the possibility with volunteers to produce early warning systems, because there are people outside and they are the ones that probably detect those invasive species at the very early stages, when the density of those invasive species or alien species are at the very low, population.
Are you talking specifically about marine?
No, not only marine. We have several examples in which the first site, it was people by just serendipity, when there is very low concentration of organisms. Imagine that you have just one organism every 100 square kilometers. To identify them or to be detected by experts, it's nearly impossible, because they are in so low concentration. So the population is so small that it's basically, you have to think about just by serendipity, people outside that by serendipity they identify them. But there are the situation which is the best one, because it's when there are these early stages in which there are so few, organisms, that if you want to react in terms of, eradication or whatever you think, it's the best moment to do it, rather than, when the invasive species are spread all over the area, and then it's very expensive, and in some cases nearly impossible to eradicate. Basically, you reduce. And we have several examples in terrestrial domain, but also in the marine domain, it's particularly important, because how many people are diving or snorkeling. I mean, from the expert side, we have maybe one campaign every season, or with a little bit of luck, one campaign every month, but in particular places. So I think it's really important to promote this idea, particularly for these early warning systems for early detection.
You're very, thank you for that. Yes, You are very right about mentioning that. And in addition, for marine, particularly because there is a whole conception that for marine environment, since the species is introduced, it becomes very difficult or impossible to control their populations and to control the invasions. So it is in the best document, it's very well highlighted the importance of early warning and preparedness in case of but what you are saying is I keep the note, and I will bring it to our discussions on the EU.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rosalie. I think we have two more questions. I saw the question in the chat.
Yeah.
But maybe we can also keep it for. But maybe in the chat before, because I think it's important for the general discussion. On which element are the most discussion expected on this item? And is it expected that we will discuss all the annexes at length during substat? So
Yes.
I think this is two practical questions for the discussion.
So I will start by the easiest one. Yes, it's expected to discuss all the annexes at length. And usually the technique is that we go from paragraph to paragraph and we discuss each annexes. And the first part of the question is it's a good question, but with a difficult answer. It's very difficult to expect something because subjects might change during negotiation, and sometimes one party requests brings something to the negotiation that we did not expect. I would say that in general, the aspects with about climate change is the easiest one because it's more comprehensive. The most difficult point, which requires negotiations about funding, is the question of cost-benefit analysis and cost-effectiveness analysis, and because it talks about eradication, and eradication is a problem that is seen as very different, with different perspectives, according to different people and beliefs. And there are countries that do not accept the idea of eradication of animals, for example. So. And in addition, there are sectors that do not accept because they like to have the species for hunting. So it will be, I guess, it will be the most difficult and the most complex annex to be discussed. Yeah. Okay. The other ones are, I imagine that the one of climate change will be the easiest one, and the first one is the most complex one, and the one about e-commerce is a question that might have different perceptions according to countries, because some countries that sells this pet or species might force for under reducing the wording of this of the importance of a regulation of the e-commerce.
Okay, thank you, Rosalie. I think we have two more, or maybe just one. We have Frank. You want to ask a question? Maybe Audrey. I don't know. No,
yes. Hello.
Okay.
Good morning. Good afternoon. I'm calling from the United States, and I wanted to ask you, Robin, one question. The focus of the project seems to be Europe, and I was wondering what is the engagement process for the rest of the world that you are in a project like yours? Do you have outreach to developing nations, or how do you establish a broader collaborative framework? And just wanted to know. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Actually, we are focusing on the European and associated countries, which is a list of countries which appears in the website. So it's mainly on the European Union, Eastern countries, some Mediterranean countries. And we are focusing on experts from this community, but I think experts themselves are working with experts from other countries. So for now, I think we are counting on the coordination in the community of experts for outside expertise from Europe, but it's still a reflection we have, and maybe we'll see on the next stage of the project how we can benefit from more extended expertise.
Yeah, just as a follow-up and maybe a recommendation. Of course, you have groups like GeoBond, the Marine Bond. You have the Ocean Decade with many different programs, and many of them which are focusing on these kinds of things. And I always wondered about the connection between the CBD and all the other conventions and other groups in the UN and non-UN groups. So I hope that there's a way to bring groups together.
Yeah, yes, that's an issue. That's why IPCC and IPBS start to work together. That's why in my presentation I show that there are some initiatives we can also coordinate with. So I think that's an ongoing process, and we, in our project, we are working on this, but there's still work to do on this. Thank you. Maybe
of this a comment on this. I mean, yeah. I do not know well the European project because I didn't take time to. But G7 is also working on and preparing workshops and a side event during the SBSTTA and online webinar about IAS in order to put forward the documents from IPBES and from and to contribute to achieve target 6. So there are different things going on.
Okay, thank you, Rosalie. I think Audrey, you can go.
Yes, hello everybody, and hello Frank. I'm here, so I can be the connection if needed. I just had a comment because I work on marine connectivity, so not specifically only alien species, but all species. And I don't know if you have planned, maybe I missed it in your presentation, but I think it's important to think about the vectors of transmission or connections between ecosystems and thinking about finding maybe refuge area that will be less connected, where you can protect native species from the invasion of certain species. So I was thinking that maybe that should be something to consider if it hasn't been yet.
You know, maybe I'm not aware of that, but as far as I remember, I did not see that on the documents. But I take note of that.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can take a last question from the participants. I'm sorry, if you don't have time to ask your question, feel free to note this question in the conversation chat, and we can send it to the speaker later. Yes, Tarek?
Hi. Thank you. Thank you
You're
for the
welcome.
presentation and all the information. I just want to ask one question, please. I'm sorry, I'm Tariq from an environmental economist from the James Hutton Institute. Actually, you have mentioned about the including the social and cultural value in the cost-benefit analysis. Actually, there are several non-market goods and services that could be included, and there is several regions that I notice in the project. So maybe the cultural and social values and other type of value will be different. So collecting this amount of data, will be very difficult to just, I want to understand a little bit more about this matter.
In fact,
thank you.
In fact, the cost-benefit analysis, cost assessment analysis, or the other I don't remember the word, analysis, is destined to be used locally. So it's often mentioned in the document, the difficulties of having all data, and that these analyses are all very data demanding. But it is possible at least to include some classes of impacts. I mean, people that do this work can imagine to use general information. I mean, about the local, but classes of magnitude of impacts, and it is better to introduce some information, even if they are a bit general, than not considering any of these.
Thank you.
But I imagine you were talking about global or which special scale you had in mind when
I'm talking mostly about the values that's related to the cultures. Because if you want to have the cost benefit analysis, that's mean you need to bring the values. Maybe you need to bring willingness to pay for that. And it is kind of wide, and several values that can be included. So I'm just wondering about it, how the process will go. So yeah, thank you. And I mean, you mentioned that's including some of them. That's what we're able to do. That to be better than avoiding that.
Yeah, if we imagine an example, there is a species that is very valued by a small population, a small local community within the region that's being considered in the analysis. And this species can be very impacted by invasive alien species. So it's one information that must be considered, and when doing this analysis, you can also rate the importance, giving different rates of importance of the data, of the extent of the impact. Anyway, there are. It's not the technical method that is a difficult thing, because statisticians can provide this method in a very easy and repeatable way. The problem is that governments introduce or include the importance of this analysis and of all the values, and consider all these different values, the different stakeholders when making the analysis.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rosalie. So I think, thank you for the question on the exchanges. I think we are done for the IAS topic, but that's only for now because I think everybody starts now. And for maybe a last question from Sanet.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's more in a general sense rather than only on AIS, because regarding this as a very heavy agenda topic already with many annexes, do you know whether there will be parallel sessions during the SBSTA? Because it's not really clear from the agenda itself.
There was a call for that, for side events, you mean?
No, I mean whether two sessions will be in parallel during the meetings.
I have no, I don't know. Maybe Robin knows, but
I don't know. I think the most eventual thing is to one of these on the first day, because they give you an agenda with the planning. Depends on some requests from some parties, it can change the schedule. And if needed, I think they can establish some more contact groups to work between plenaries. But it's not clear for now. And as it's only a 5-day meeting, I think everything will be very fast. So I think I think they are trying to be more efficient with less time to go straight to the point. So that's why I think it will be important to keep focused on the discussions, not to make the things. That's what we also have to keep in mind, is that there will be another SBSTA, but on other topics before COP16. So I think there will be several moments in the inter-COP session to address some elements, but I think it will be very fast. We won't have the time that we had for COP15 with the delay from the pandemic and this kind of things. So just stay focused on there will be also SBI to work on the implementation aspect. So that's all I know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you for the question. Thank you, Rosalie. So as I was saying, it's not the end. I think it's just the start of the discussions, because after this training session, we'll come back to you to know if you are interested to participate and contribute to discussions in between now and the workshops. So all your questions and inputs can be taken into account later. Come back to you for this. So for next topic, unfortunately, I think the speaker is not. Maybe the next topic on plant conservation with Pauli, if she is available to now. So, here or Maite, maybe. Carly and Maite, maybe. Maybe, okay. Here you are.
Hello, sorry.
Sorry. If it's a problem for you, we can delay this a little, but if you are ready now, we can go now.
No, that's fine. Sorry, my microphone and camera were just not working. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. I'm just going to share my presentation.
So we are going on the plant conservation item. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Feel free to present yourself. Okay. We see your screen.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's in full screen. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry about the technical glitches in the beginning. I'm just going to briefly give you an overview of the global strategy for plant conservation, background, history, and where we're at now going into SBSTTA-25. So the global strategy for plant conservation, or GSPC as we often refer to it, so it's not so long, was adopted by 187 governments at the 6th COP in 2002. It had 16 outcome-orientated targets, which were updated in 2010 for the second phase of the GSPC. And it was the first ever biodiversity targets adopted at an international level. We didn't quite realize it at the time, but it was quite significant. And it was a pilot in target setting for the CBD itself. So the scope of the GSPC from 2011 till 2020 was to understand and document plant diversity, conserve plant diversity, using plant diversity sustainably, promoting education and awareness, and then capacity building for plant diversity. And as you can see, all these themes link with the targets within the CBD, and going forward now, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework as well. So the GSPC has several coordinating mechanisms that it runs with. So the international liaison group meetings discuss GSPC. We have national focal points. We have the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation, and I'll speak briefly about that now. And of course, the CBD Secretariat. So the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation, or another acronym, GPPC, was launched at COP7 in Malaysia, with only a few institutions recognizing that the plant community and the botanic garden community particularly needs to focus on plant biodiversity. We are currently sitting at over 60 institutions as members of the GPPC. And then we developed the plants2020.net website for a toolkit. This was launched in 2012, and it provides tools and resources to support the implementation of the targets for phase 1 and particularly phase 2 GSPC. And those are in the six of the UN languages. So GSPC was also one of the first to implement targets, and also providing guidance in the various UN languages. So the achievement of the GSPC leading up to 2020 and looking at the targets there, it recognized the special importance of plants in global biodiversity conservation. It was the first ever, as I said, international outcome-orientated targets. It was a model of what followed with the Aichi targets. So Aichi targets, many of them are very similar to the GSPC targets, but the GSPC target wording came first. And then once the Aichi targets were defined, we refined the GSPC targets for phase 2. It showed the botanical community's leadership in conservation and the work that is done across this whole network. And it was important in providing a unified strategy for the botanic garden community, where we could have a set of shared principles, objectives, actions and targets, and monitoring. A lot is mentioned today already on monitoring, and we were starting to implement a lot of monitoring on the GSPC. We also helped with implementation of the NBSAPs and the National Plant Conservation Strategies, which a lot of them came out and were based on the GSPC targets. And it did help to broaden in general plant conservation activities worldwide, linking with climate change, with sustainable livelihoods. And it really did provide a clear long-term set of goals that many have said have been achieved nationally. Globally, we didn't really achieve them, similar to the Aichi targets. But if I can show you this slide, which is quite detailed, we were asked by the CBD Secretariat, so that is BGCI, which is Botanic Gardens Conservation International, which is the Secretariat for the GPPC, to undertake a review of the progress of the GSPC. And we did this in 2019, and we used the 6 national reports of countries to the CBD, a survey of all our GPPC members. It was about 50 members at that stage, published reports and also grey literature, sorry. And we did this for the Secretariat, which we provided to the Secretariat, and they in turn published that as a report, the Plant Conservation Report in 2020. So the arrows on the right of the screen, the arrows indicate global progress, so progress being made, and the pie charts show combined progress of national and international targets. And what is important is that progress was on track, that most targets were to be achieved. There had been significant improvement, and the arrows were headed in the right direction. So this could be taken as a win. Sorry, there we go. So the progress at the European level, and I've included a slide for this particular online training session. So a report was published by Planta Europa and Plant Life for Europe, and it showed that there were 20 to 30,000 vascular plant species across Europe, depending on the boundaries that one was using, and that the key threats were habitat loss, invasive alien species, climate change, and policies which weren't particularly adequate for certain species or vegetation types. We had 2 European plant conservation strategies produced from 2002, 2007, and then 2008 to 2014. And in 2020, there was a review of the progress, which showed that it was variable across European countries, but collectively the targets weren't met, which is very similar to the global position for the GSPC targets. But, you know, as an example, for the European red list of plants, so many groups were red listed. That's crop wild relatives, trees, bryophytes. The results were very interesting. They showed that more than 20% of the species that were assessed were under threat. So targets may not have been met, but for this purpose and going forward now, with the GBF targets, it's very important to know that there's many species under threat and what they already are. So the foundations are there. So I'd just like to share 2 examples of targets that were met. One is an online flora of all known plants. That was target 1. And this focused around a set of easily understood targets, and this was measurable. And it was established, the World Flora Online, and then in 2012, the World Flora Online Consortium was established, and that's led by the Missouri Botanic Garden. It has 41 partners worldwide, and it's open access, web-based compendium of botanic plants, the names, and it has been well received. And it's a fantastic example of how a simple and clear effective target can make a difference to being achieved or not, and it's constantly updated, it's constantly used. Target 2 as well was an assessment of the conservation status of all known plant species, and as I was saying with the European progress report, we saw that there was a lot of red listing that was done across Europe, and as a global target, this one was absolutely fantastic. We had buy-in, we had champions, and We've got tools that have been developed and published, and there's a much bigger understanding now of the threats to plant species in particular, and how we actually need to start red listing a lot more plant groups and having them published. And that feeds into spatial planning and land management and a whole lot of protected area declaration, as well as wildlife species being utilized. So this, once again, is a foundational target that was achieved from the GSPC, and we're carrying it forward into the new set of actions. So going forward, the current context, so we developed a post-2020 GSPC set of targets, which was proposed by the GSPC Liaison Group at a conference in South Africa in 2018. And then these targets were supported at the World Forum on Plant Conservation in China in 2019. We then proceeded with stakeholder consultations from 2019 to 21, and a lot of support was gathered and suggestions for new targets and continuing the work of the GSPC. And at an informal SBSTTA session in 2021, many parties voiced their support for this to be continued. And we submitted a draft to the CBD Secretariat at SBSTTA-24 on the proposed targets and where we need to go, and an agreement that the post-2020 GSPC should take the form of a set of actions that support the global biodiversity framework, was then made at COP15. So decision 15.5 and 15.13 did invite the GPPC to prepare a set of complementary actions to support the global biodiversity framework. And then at SBSTTA-25, this would be agreed to go to the following conference of the parties. So we did undertake this, change the proposed targets that we had for the third phase of the GSPC into complementary actions, and it was reviewed by the GPPC earlier this year. We then resubmitted to the Secretariat, who sent it to the parties for peer review during June and July of this year, and all those comments and suggestions were then incorporated into an action framework, which has recently been published and is on the agenda for SBSTTA-25. And it takes the plant conservation actions, looking at how to implement those and achieve those in order to achieve the GBF targets. And it covers all of them except targets 17 and 18, where as a plant community, we don't see a particular plant conservation action. We just need to support those two targets in particular. They're very important, and cutting out a special plant conservation action for that would be fruitless, and we actually need to achieve target 17 and 18 as they stand now within the GBF. So the 2023 GSPC complementary actions, the framework, follows the structure of the GBF. So we have our high-level goals, which are ecosystem conservation, species conservation, conservation of genetic diversity, and then benefits from biodiversity. And we have the 21 actions aligned so that they are easy to read for parties and implementers. And you can actually have them in a table as they're presented in the SBSTTA-25 document in Annex 1. So you can see where the target is and the complementary action for that. So an example of the actions for the targets on reducing threats, for instance, is plant diversity must be included in spatial planning and land management. That restoring degraded ecosystems must include native species, avoiding invasive and alien species. Protecting important areas of plant diversity needs to be taken into consideration when looking at overall biodiversity conservation. We need to conserve threatened species in situ as well as ex situ, because ex situ we need to look at things like restoration and plant material to grow in order to take back to ecosystems and for climate adaptation. Sustainable trade in many plant species is addressed, controlling invasive species, reducing anthropogenic threats, and carbon sequestration using appropriate diverse native species, and once again, not planting non-native and alien invasive species for carbon sequestration. And then under the group of targets for meeting people's needs for a plant conservation perspective, we have that plant diversity needs to be conserved to support nutrition, health, and livelihoods, that we have sustainable land use that support wild plant diversity, as well as cultivated plant crops and commercial species, conserving genetic resources of crop wild relatives and medicinal plants, for instance. We need to promote urban green space, access and benefit sharing, and of course, well-being in the wider environment. So getting on to the challenges of the GSPC, and as I mentioned, you know, the targets weren't met for phase 2, very similar to the Aichi targets. And the one main cause of this was a lack of reporting and data management. And this was mentioned earlier, that databases are not the same, they're not similar, there's not sharing of data. And of course, there weren't reporting templates in place to collect the data and similar reporting mechanisms. So this was quite a challenge. The sharing of plant material for ex situ conservation, as I've said, is particularly important, but there was a lot of red tape and bureaucracy in sharing material across borders, phytosanitary, for instance, and these mechanisms need to be checked and created, and it's not that difficult. Those systems are in place. The scientific contribution of key players needs to be strengthened, and this speaks to plant blindness, where plants often aren't recognized as fundamental to a lot of biodiversity conservation or critical, and that needs to be brought higher up in the hierarchy of where scientific contribution comes in. There's also a need to strengthen government policy and commitment, and this doesn't only pertain to plant conservation. I think it's embedded throughout the CBD targets. Fundraising is a major constraint. It's often difficult to raise funds to red list plant species, but it's easier to raise funds to perhaps go and put camera traps out for snow leopards. Love snow leopards, but sometimes a lot of funding is disproportionately distributed. We have to support capacity building programs. If we're going to implement many of these targets and these GSPC actions, we need to ensure that the people who are going to be doing this have the right skills. We need to identify the people with those existing skills and build capacity now in order to implement and monitor our actions. Further involvement of local communities is critical. We're going to get nowhere if we don't include local communities and traditional knowledge and traditional practices. We need to enhance gender equality across all of our actions, and to adapt to new challenges, enhance our research, and not always do everything because this is the way we've always done it. We need to be flexible, adaptable, and innovative in our way forward now. So I've also once again copied some challenges that came out of the European report, particularly, and it's very similar to the ones I've just run through, but in particular for Europe, the threat the emerging threats to plants from invasive pests and diseases is quite severe. It's quite scary. This is linked to climate change, shifting temperatures, fires, for instance. Over the summer, we have seen massive fires along the Mediterranean coast and Europe. And we have pollinator declines, and of course, demand for wood renewable energy is quite a big challenge. We have a lack of regional level data. Once again, data and databases needs to be looked at. We need to ensure that ecosystem approaches also include species level conservation, and that species level needs aren't just overlooked because we're doing ecosystem conservation. We certainly need to look more at sectoral integration, looking at agri-environmental policy with plant conservation, with climate change conservation, carbon sequestration, and talk to those in other sectors. We need to address plant blindness, as I've said, particularly for funding. We need to embrace citizen science more, and resourcing and capacity, particularly lack of sharing beyond Europe, was cited in the report as quite a challenge. So looking at the way forward, we would like to ensure support for the GSPC for the third phase by parties at SBSTTA-25 and then on to COP16. And once we've got that support and the GSPC actions are accepted, they can be implemented, and we're looking at developing and updating national and regional actions and targets for plant conservation. How are we going to incorporate them into the relevant plans and programs and initiatives? NBSAPs, as I mentioned previously, were used, and we certainly want to help with those, and alignment with national and regional efforts to implement the Global Biodiversity Framework through the actions of the GSPC. And particularly important, which we did find helped in the first two phases, was we need to identify champions to lead various actions and provide support. And I do believe that, you know, the work we're doing in Europe is a great example and can be provided to others of how we should go about doing it, and learning. Mutual learning is the way forward to achieve the targets in the next phase. So thank you. I feel I've rushed through it. I do speak quite fast, but I welcome any questions on this, and yeah, happy to discuss anything. And my colleague Mate is also, she's online, happy to answer questions. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Carly, and thank you for your presentation. Thank you for Maite also attending the training sessions, and now it's open for questions. As before, you can either raise your hand or put some question in the conversation chat. Yeah, I think we have one. Yes, Quentin, you can ask your question. Yeah.
Hi, I just thought, because I work at a botanic garden in Belgium, I thought it was worth pointing out the extra responsibility Europe has in its efforts to decolonialize, because we literally went around the world collecting bits of every plant and bringing them back to Europe. We now have some responsibility, or a lot of responsibility, to share this back to the countries where we took these from, and work with those countries to help them protect their species as well. So it's not just looking at the European species that Europe has to do, but also look at the species globally and share all those data too.
Thanks, Quentin. Yes, it is something we need to be aware of. And I do know a lot of botanic gardens are digitizing their collections so that they're more freely available, and we don't have to do the old put it in the post and ship it off, and risk collections being lost or destroyed because phytosanitary certificates weren't in place. And I believe a lot of countries are welcoming this, because it provides that the data is open and accessible to more than the repository country or herbarium and the state of origin, but globally we can now share this and share this data on a much bigger scale, and that does help with mapping for KBAs and important plant areas, and declaring protected areas and that kind of work that we've been using for the digitized herbarium specimens. But I agree, traditional knowledge and those aspects as well, and we have addressed those in the GSPC actions. So going forward, those errors don't ever happen again, and we acknowledge that we sit on a wealth of information and to share it with those who really can implement and make changes. Sean, I think you've got your hand up.
Yes, Sean, please ask your question.
Hello, thanks so much, Carly. I'm Sean Hoban at the Morton Arboretum, also a botanic garden outside of Chicago. I really appreciate, especially one of your slides, which was like kind of the barriers and you talked about one of the barriers being like quantitative data reporting and recording, and how do you see that going forward for the GSPC in the future? Yeah, basically reporting on targets.
I think our lessons learned from the previous phase were that we didn't have standard reporting templates from the GPPC that we could share with national governments, implementers, any programs really. So everyone was collecting data. It was very similar, but it was all in different formats, and there was also no hub. And we were hoping that the Plants 2020 website would be a hub. And we are looking at revamping that site, and that's exactly what we want. We want one shared space where parties can put we have a template, they can download it and report very similar to what parties are doing for the CBD, and make it really easily accessible in different languages, helping those if we don't have their languages, and trying to get as many as we can. And then we can report as the GSPC to the CBD Secretariat and have this data collated, and also really be helpful for parties to know who's doing what and share lessons learned. And so that's where we want to go in the next phase. And it's not too far away. I believe others are doing it too. For instance, reporting on invasive alien species, wildlife trafficking. So it is the way forward. It's just getting buy-in from national governments to try and implement those templates or parts of those templates into their national programs. So those doing the recording and the reporting are used to seeing that, and it's not extra burden on them.
Thanks so much. That was really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer, Carly. I think we have 2 more questions in the chat. So one which is very interesting, and thanks also you for the interesting presentation. But the question is, how does it link to the Global Species Action Plan, which is another tool to help implement the GBF targets, which references GSCP only once or twice, if it's not mistaken. So there is this other action, and how does it may be linked or not?
So we've been in discussions with the IUCN and the Global Species Action Plan, and they do dovetail, they fit together. Many of the actions that the GSPC we've published, it fits within the action plan. They speak to each other, and if you do one, you can actually achieve doing the other. And we've had the IUCN commenting across all the iterations from targets to complementary actions as we go. So it does reference it only twice or maybe 3 times, but in the workings of our actions and the Species Action Plan, they're certainly integrated.
Thank you. There is another question from Frank. Dear Carly, does the website hub for data the GSPC link to databases like JBEF? And do you follow standard data format for taxonomy and genetics, such as being implemented by Darwin Core, incorporating and yes, I don't know which one. I know Darwin Core, but I don't know the last. This is the question.
Thanks, Frank. We're as I say, we're developing it now. We are going to link with GBIF. I mean, that's definitely a standard. We're also going to have the IPAs, the important plant areas, in there. And as I say, we don't want to rebuild our own data formats. We're going to look at what's out there and just make it as easy as possible for everyone. And yes, we will have standard taxonomic. And the genetics isn't my field of expertise. I'll have to get back to you on the Darwin Core from my colleagues, but from those discussions in a side working group, everything is standardized, if that makes sense. And we are linking in with as many as possible. We don't want to reinvent the wheel.
link in the chat. So it's still open for discussion.
Any more?
Some more questions to ask.
And so I did want to say on the discussion of invasive alien species, in the GSPC actions, particularly for climate change, we have noted that, you know, we really would ideally like to see native species being used in ecosystem services and land degradation and carbon capture rather than alien species. And then also recognizing that under sustainable livelihoods, there's always that slight risk that invasive alien species are maintained and kept in a country because the economic benefits are better than what is seen as the economic benefits from natural biodiversity and natural plants. And this is just something it's a precaution that we've flagged a few times, and we are writing an infodoc, which we're going to publish before SBSTTA, which will complement the document that's been published for the agenda item on plant conservation. So each action will have a description and a discussion behind it of why that action is there. And I do believe it'll complement the documents on invasive alien species quite nicely with the risk benefits that we were speaking about earlier today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben.
Sean is back. Good for you, Sean. Yes.
Another question, if there's time. You talked about, and actually even the opening speaker talked about capacity building. So that was one of the lessons from both the GSPC and the IEG targets. And it's a word a lot of people are talking about right now. And I've been trying to think about this myself. It seems that there's capacity building needed at so many levels, from scientific infrastructure in lower income countries to monitoring infrastructure, capacity building in terms of educating and reaching out to policymakers, people on the ground managing. So like there are many levels of capacity building, and can you speak to which ones are maybe the most pressing need?
Wow, Sean, that's quite the question. I mean, this is my opinion, but I think capacity building in all forms is super important. We're not going to achieve any targets, implement any actions if we don't have the infrastructure, be it the scientific infrastructure, electronic databases, or the actual skills to go and plant a tree. So they're all critically important depending on which level of the targets you're looking at or the actions. I think we do take a lot for granted, and this brings in that sort of colonial thinking sometimes, that there's no capacity. There is capacity and there's skills. It may not be a Western definition or an Eastern definition or whoever's looking at it. And that's where engaging with the IPLCs is critical. And, do they know how to plant plants? Yes, most do. Maybe it's not exactly a horticultural handbook, but, working with the local communities and assessing exactly which skills and capacities needed for that target and that action on the ground is better than maybe just a broad, we need horticultural skills everywhere, or we need scientific databases everywhere. And I do believe there's a lot out there already, and we just need to focus and know where the gaps are. So from an implementation point of view, and the GSPC are actions, not targets, we're looking at the infrastructure to provide facilities to implement actions and the actual skills, identifying those experts and skill share, and encouraging people, letting them know that they actually do have the skills, because I don't think a lot of people recognize what those skills are, and that they probably already have them. So I feel like a politician.
Really
I've talked around you, but yeah.
No, I think that was really helpful in terms of recognizing the knowledge and skills that are probably available locally, which might be underappreciated, and maybe doing reciprocal knowledge exchange so that, yeah, sharing of knowledge, and then recognizing what specific things are needed in specific places rather than general. So that was great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Also, maybe I can relay a message from Maite in the chat that she noticed that nation of a focal point for the partenariat, for the global partenariat, is also a crucial point to support the action plans. So I don't know, because I'm not very fit, but maybe if you're in your country, there is no such national focal point. Maybe that's a request or demand you can address to your government or your representative. I think this is an important point to have such a national point in your country if possible. So I think, thank you, Maite, for the remark. Question on this? If not, I propose to take a short break. So a bit less than 10 minutes. So we can meet in a few minutes for the next topic, which will be on wildlife sustainable management. See you.
Thank you.